Today I'm baking at home and I'm making whole wheat bread with 100% whole wheat flour. So I'm adding the flour to a bowl and I'm making sure that I do so lightly, meaning that I don't pack the cup, but that I aerate the flour as I go along. And to that I'm adding some kosher salts and some active dry yeast. Now, the first time I made this bread, I used molasses. I don't really think I liked the first loaf, so the second time, in the latter half of the video, you'll see the finished loaf had honey. I also put in some canola oil, and now I'm using warm water, and the water really needs to be between 110 and 115 degrees. So once you add the water and you give everything a good mix, and I'm using a spatula, at this point I just want to form a rough ball. I don't want to knead it yet. I need this dough to rest for 20 minutes so that the water can absorb into the flour. And now after 20 minutes of that dough resting, I'm going to knead it. And you can either do it by hand, or if you happen to have an electric mixer, let the mixer do the work. So now this needs to knead for about 6 to 8 minutes until it becomes nice and smooth and elastic. After the kneading process, you want to let the dough rest in a lightly oiled bowl. You can use that same mixer bowl, or I have a large measuring cup that a lot of times I use. But you want to make sure that your dough has doubled in size, and don't let it rise beyond the doubling point, because you can stress your dough out that way and you won't get a good loaf of bread. So smooth it, put it in a bowl or glass measuring cup, and let it hang out for about an hour, depends on how hot your kitchen is. Okay, just get it to double in size. I'm preparing two 8.5 by 4.5 loaf pans because the first time I baked it, I only used one, and the dough was too much for my size loaf pans. So I would suggest either using a true 9 by 5 loaf pan, or like I'm doing, split the dough in half. So this was my second attempt, and this was the one that had honey in it. So I'm just scraping down the dough with a bench scraper. You could use a spatula, and I'm going to get the dough out so that I can form it into 2 loaves. Now, for this process, I like to use a scale because when I try to eyeball things, I don't really get an accurate split. So I split the dough in half, and as you can see, I still had to take some off to even it out. Having done that, I want to now put the dough that I'm forming into a loaf. And the first step, I always try to flatten it and then fold it in half, fold the sides in, and fold the other half up, kind of like I'm getting ready to make a French baguette. And then just roll it a little bit till it's the length of the pan. And if you're just using one loaf pan, process is the same. And I oiled that loaf pan lightly. Do the same thing with the other one. And these made little loaves. So again, if you're gonna do this recipe really is for one pound loaf using a 9 by 5. Now it's important that I spritz the top with oil. It doesn't really matter what oil. I actually used olive oil, and just brush or rub the oil on top. And then these need to cover and sit and rise another hour and a half, depending on how hot your kitchen is. Now these go into a 350 degree oven for about 30 to 40 minutes, or until the internal temperature is 190 degrees. And you may need to tent the top with some foil about 20 minutes in so it doesn't burn. You have to let these cool a bit before slicing, and with some butter and jam, or just as sandwich bread, this bread really was amazing. For this recipe and more, visit myclasscancook.com.